Georgia could feature prominently in this year's midterms. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger faces a tough re-election campaign himself. In the past, he has defended Georgia's elections as secure, despite former President Trump's claims. Now, the secretary is calling for assigning state troopers to polling places.
Georgia has become the center of the election universe. And this year, we're going to have hard-fought campaigns that we're going to be watched all across the country. And every indication is that we're going to have close races. With that environment, it only makes sense to provide additional resources for election security so that everyone can have confidence in the results.
Now, Mr. Raffensperger's office says it has not prepared any legislation, nor is it clear how much this would cost. That is just one of Georgia's big election year stories. The other is in Atlanta, with an effort to make one neighborhood its own city. That neighborhood is Buckhead, an affluent district north of downtown. If you've ever been to Atlanta and shopped at Lenox Square Mall, that's Buckhead. A local campaign had been pushing for Buckhead to secede from Atlanta. Now, that would dramatically change the city's demographics. Atlanta is nearly half black and around 40% white. How would removing Buckhead change that? Well, the proposed Buckhead city would be overwhelmingly white. That is why some critics call this effort a severe case of white flight. And Buckhead's median income is much higher than the city overall. So secession would diminish Atlanta's tax base. By one estimate, Buckhead alone accounts for 38% of Atlanta's tax revenue. So will this neighborhood secede from Atlanta? Not anytime soon. Last week, Georgia's Republican House Speaker David Ralston came out against the proposal. So did the Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan. And that means supporters of the Buckhead city effort no longer have a political path forward, at least not right now. Let's break all this down with Greg Bluestein, a political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and an MSNBC political contributor. Greg, let's start with the announcement from the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. What's his rationale for this?
Yeah, well, part of the rationale, this is a warning. There's been lots of threats against election officials, against Brad Raffensperger himself, against his top deputies. So there is a reason to be concerned if you're the state's top elections officials that poll workers and others will come under threats. But the other part is political. He's facing criticism from both Democrats and Republicans. He's looking to sort of stand out against a very tough Trump-backed primary challenger in Congressman Jody Hice. And this is one way he can kind of change the conversation and say, look, I'm calling for more security. Another part that he's also calling for is he wants help from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to probe allegations of voter fraud. This is something that Speaker David Ralston, Governor Kemp, former Senator David Perdue, they've all endorsed similar ideas. And now this is the first time he's getting on board with that, to have state police essentially be tasked with investigating allegations of voter fraud.
This sounds like it's a little bit muddied when we talk about election security. I understand the argument about physical security, right? That there have been threats against poll workers and election officials. We've seen that across the country in the aftermath of the 2020 election. But then there's this other strand of thought about election security, which has had to go to some of the conspiracy theories around the last election. Indeed, Mr. Raffensperger himself asked the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to investigate claims that there had been malfeasance at the polls, and it closed the investigation because it couldn't find anything. So it sounds like we're talking about a few different things here.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The GBI had found no evidence of any wrongdoing, no reason to investigate further. And as you mentioned, there's been no evidence whatsoever of any sort of rampant, widespread voting fraud, multiple recounts, audits of absentee ballots in one of Georgia's most populous suburbs, both found no reason to be concerned about any sort of widespread voting fraud at all. But this is part of the Republican messaging post-Trump. It is voter integrity is the phrase they use to say that, hey, there might have been problems, and we want to make sure we get to the root of it, even though there were no problems. And Brad Raffensperger was kind of out front, reminding people left and right that this was a free and fair election in Georgia.
I also want to get to this Buckhead City secession effort. We spoke to Andre Dickens, who's the new mayor of Atlanta, the newly elected mayor of Atlanta. Crime has been a big part of this story from the beginning, at least among the stated reasons that supporters of this secession effort gave. Here's part of what the mayor said in terms of his strategy for dealing with crime in Atlanta. Watch.
I'm going to hire 250 police officers in the first year because we lost a lot of officers over the past few years. And this is not going to cost us any new money. It's already in the budget. We're just aggressively going about it. I'm using technology like street lights and Shot Spotter to find out where shots are, new cameras to be able to, to have a deterrence for crime, but also to quickly help us find suspects. Gang violence is growing in our cities because of the isolation and depression and experiences related to COVID. So we're going to make sure we have gang intervention and gang, reduction activities so that we can get these young folks some opportunities to do the right thing.
Greg, can we just be clear in terms of what's underneath this secession effort? Like, I can understand concerns about crime, but black folks in Atlanta have concerns about crime too. And the money that comes partly from neighborhoods like Buckhead that filters into the city's crime prevention efforts could be spent, I guess, toward reducing crime citywide as opposed to just tearing away from Atlanta. What is this actually about? Is this about crime? Is this about race? Is this about wealth? Like, what's really going on here?
Race, wealth. This is a wealthy, majority white enclave that was trying to break away. And it would set a precedent in Georgia. This would be the first community to de-annex itself, to secede from an existing city in modern Georgia history. So this was something that had a lot of lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans, concerned. But this was also a political issue because you had the key supporters. There were Republicans who didn't live in the area. Former Senator David Perdue, who's running for governor, rural lawmakers, and other conservatives. Every lawmaker who represented the city of Atlanta, all Democrats, each opposed it. So basically, there was an argument that carpetbaggers, that non-Atlantans were trying to influence this debate. And the leader of this movement is a former New York transplant who moved to Atlanta recently named Bill White, who had curried favor with Republicans, but began to lose that favor in recent days as he amplified a racist post on Twitter and spread around conspiracy theories that really alienated conservative lawmakers, even some of his top supporters, over the last few days.
I think we should be clear also, it's not like people are leaving Atlanta in droves necessarily. The city keeps, one of my good friends said the sign on the city limit should say, "Welcome to Atlanta, we full." Like the city is not shrinking, first of all. But with regards to why the effort lost support, what was it that finally made people walk away from this?
You know, there was always some concerns, underlying concerns from conservatives and Democrats, but really the ruling Republicans in the Georgia legislature, that this would set this precedent and allow other cities to sort of split apart. You know, if Atlanta can do it, what about Athens, Georgia? What about Macon, Georgia? But one of the other major concerns was the question of crime, the question of financing. I spoke to Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, who came out in opposition to this. And there was a major moment last week when he said he will not let this pass the state Senate, which is where he's the president of. He said, look, supporters have yet to elaborate on their plan to stop crime. Crime doesn't stop at city limits. Someone doesn't just see a welcome to Atlanta sign and turn around, even if it does say "we full." There's also questions about financing, about what happens to public schools that were under Atlanta public school system that would be in this new Buckhead city limits. So there's a lot of questions that were yet unanswered. And these are costly questions. These are issues that involve billions of dollars of tax revenue. And the corporate community had also started coming out. We're talking about some of the biggest landlords, some of the biggest name companies in Georgia that are based in Buckhead saying no, no, no.
And last 10 seconds, Greg, is this effort dead, or do the supporters plan to bring it up again in the future? Briefly.
It's dead this year, but it's coming back next year if there's still a Republican governor.
Gotcha. Greg Bluestein of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Greg, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.